From Emma Bovary to Captain Ahab to Raskolnikov, fiction is brimming with unlikable characters. So, does that mean you should populate your stories with unlikable characters too? All right, so welcome everyone. So we are in the dead of winter. It's cold, dark, gray. So it's the perfect time to talk about unlikable characters. It's definitely a balancing act. We want to find the right balance between likability and unlikability. A good way to think about it is, imagine you are cooking a dish. You just want to add that really potent spice to give it a kind of intoxicating flavor. But you just have to get just the right amount of spice. You don't want too much, you don't want too little. Sort of the same way when you're writing a unlikable character. You really just want to strike the right balance, strike the right tone. Just like with that dish, when you get the spices right, it really adds nuance and it makes it intriguing. So another thing about the unlikable character is just that they enhance the overall dramatic narrative. Now imagine a house party scene and it's full of friendly, likable people and everyone's having a good time. That's an ideal situation in real life, but in fiction, it might not be the most interesting scene. But then you add a callous, narcissistic character to that mix, and suddenly things can get interesting and you can bring things to a kind of dramatic sizzle with that. And then I think on an overall narrative level, it adds, all sorts of nuance and complexity that otherwise might not be there. So let's say you want to write a story and you've decided that you want to have a unlikable character. How do you go about doing that? How do you approach it? Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly what to do. I mean, that's up to you to decide just how the character is unlikable, why they're unlikable. You get to fill in the details. But I will tell you that I personally think it's really helpful to start with a question. So I've got a character who is unlikable for whatever reasons, and you want to ask yourself why. And then as you're telling the story and the character is going through that story, you might want to gently tease out just why they're unlikable. And that is a very difficult thing to do. Now, beyond that is the question of, is the character who is unlikable redeemed by the end? I love a good redemption story as much as anybody, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary that the unlikable character in your story is redeemed. Just like in real life, there are some unlikable characters who populate the world we live in. They don't always find redemption. So in the stories we tell, you don't have to give them redemption either. I think as long as we just have a sense of why they're behaving this way, I think that is enough. All right, so the last thing I'd like to talk about on this topic is what I like to call the scale of risk. So imagine all your characters are in a line. Now on this end, we've got your antagonist or villain. And then all the way on this end, we've got the protagonist or the hero of the story. Now, when you are writing an unlikable character, they kind of move along this scale. And, let's say they start here, and then as they move along here, all the way to where the hero or protagonist is, the risk increases, the stakes go up. So what does that actually look like? So imagine your antagonist is unlikable. Now, that's almost a tautological statement because, typically the antagonist or the villain is, obviously unlikable. Imagine Judge Holden in Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, just a horrifying, shockingly awful character. But they're the villain of the story, so it's not shocking that McCarthy made them that way. So the risk is pretty low for making Judge Holden unlikable. But now we move a little bit closer uh, along the scale. So let's say we are now looking at a supporting character who's a little closer to the hero. So an example that we could think of is Aunt Petunia in Harry Potter. Now, Aunt Petunia definitely fits into the unlikable character category. You know, this is a cold-hearted kind of person, but the risk is still fairly low because she's just a side character. So, you know, we're not totally invested in her, and her proximity to Harry is fairly distant. In the grand scheme of things. Now, I should also add that if you are looking for a good model for how to write an unlikable character, definitely study Aunt Petunia. She is a perfect case for how to craft an unlikable supporting character. Now, initially, we're kind of repelled by her, but as the story gradually moves along, we begin to understand just why she's acting this way. We, learn that she was shunned, she was rejected, and she's very bitter about this. And she's taking out her disappointment on others. Now, this is just a classic, intoxicating recipe for crafting an unlikable character, and it's just rife with dramatic potentials. All right, so now we're moving further along the scale. We are getting closer and closer to the protagonist. So, an unlikable character at this point is going to look maybe like a love interest. So, an example that I had in mind was Henry Crawford in Jane Austen's Mansfield Park. Henry Crawford is definitely unlikable. The guy is very wealthy. He's kind of a snob. He does not take life seriously. He's never had to work for anything in his life. He is very flirtatious, and he kind of treats his pursuit of women as a game, and he seems to genuinely enjoy just breaking their hearts at the end. So this guy is definitely problematic, and he's also interested in the heroine of the story, who's Fanny Price. So things get really complicated at this point because we have this character who nobody really likes, but the person who he's interested in has these really rigid, high moral standards. So at this point, the stakes are really high because the unlikable character is so close to the hero of the story. In order for that to work, you have to deliver on the complexity and the nuance of that character. And Jane Austen does a phenomenal job. Henry Crawford's arc is fascinating. I'm not going to spoil what happens, but if you want a really good example for how to just have a really compelling, unlikable character, it's a great place to look. Moving on, we are finally at the very end of the scale, and that, as you probably figured out, is when you make the hero or the protagonist of the story unlikable. So this is the hardest thing to do in my mind. This is the character who the reader is supposed to be invested in, who the reader is supposed to care about. This is the character that makes us keep reading. And when that character is unlikable, the writer is faced with an enormous challenge. The one that's on my mind right now is the unnamed protagonist in Ottessa Moshfegh's My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which in one of my previous videos I mentioned was one of my favorite books I read last year. Now, this is just a complete masterclass in how to write an unlikable protagonist. The character in that story essentially decides that she needs a reboot in life, and so she's going to try to spend an entire year sleeping as much as possible. So she kind of shuts everybody out of her life and truly is just thinking about herself. This is a person who's just become very jaded and cruel and kind of heartless, and she's kind of disregarded all sort of ethical and societal standards. But we do care because she's trying to improve her life. But it's a perfect example of how to write an unlikable protagonist. It's a really delicate balancing act, and I have no idea exactly how Moshfegh pulled it off. I was shocked when I finished the book by the feelings that I had. And it definitely made me want to attempt to write someday a very unlikable protagonist, but it also made me realize just how challenging it is. But we do need to read the work of others to get inspired and to kind of see how to do it. So look no further than my year of rest and relaxation. It's just phenomenal. All right, so if you've made it this far in the video, then I think you have some interest in unlikable characters, or you're at least intrigued by them. So I want to close on a slightly more positive note, and that is that unlikable characters in fiction actually have, in my mind, real world implications. I think when we encounter a really well drawn, unlikable character in a book, that changes how we see the world, because we encounter these types of people in our own lives. And so I think the next time you are at a grocery store or, at work, and there's someone who's just driving you crazy with their behavior, you know, before instantly passing judgment on them, maybe just pause for a moment and just ask, you know, why exactly are you acting this way? All right, so that's a wrap on this topic. If you did enjoy the video, please give it a thumbs up. And, if you do like these videos in general, please subscribe to the channel. It definitely helps me out. And, well, that's pretty much it. So we'll see you next time.